US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has described the leak of confidential documents by Wikileaks as a serious crime and has vowed to pursue the perpetrators. She said earlier that it, quote, puts people's lives in danger, threatens national security and undermines our efforts to work with other countries to solve shared problems. It's not clear what Australian correspondence will come to light with these leaks. We do know there are 250,000 classified documents, though, and around 1,500 mention Australia in some shape or form. Most of them are cables from the US Embassy in Canberra. The federal police have been called in to investigate, and the Gillard government has commissioned a whole-of-government task force to see what can be done to try and reduce the impact of these leaks. Stephen Smith is the Defence Minister. He joined you in our Parliament House studio. Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
The US Ambassador, Jeffrey Bleach, has briefed the government on what to expect from the publication of the cables. How bad is it?
Well, the Ambassador gave me and Foreign Minister Rudd and the Attorney-General, Mr McClellan, the courtesy of letting us know at the end of last week that this was in prospect, and we're now going through the painstaking job of searching all of the cables that are and are proposed to be released to ensure that Australia's national interest and national security interests have not been adversely impacted upon. This is the third round of Wikileaks that we've seen. The two earlier rounds have been much more directly in my own patch. These ones are a much wider ambit, covering as they do US cables, so we just have to go through that painstaking process of examining each of the cables as they come to light.
One of the cables apparently refers to Australia and says, quote, rock-solid partners like Australia don't pack enough punch to step out in front, and the UN is a non-player. It falls to the US once again. That's a bit insulting, isn't it? What happened to our sort of middle power kind of push there?
Well, when it comes to diplomatic cables, I think that there are a number of points that need to be made. Firstly, when they are released, you do have to be careful to ensure that there's no adverse interest to a general national security interest, but also the release of such cables can put people at risk, including the diplomats themselves. So that's our general starting point. But is that
their view of Australia, and is that the view expressed to you behind closed doors, that Australia really doesn't pack much punch?
Well, the second point I'm about to make is, of course, these are individual cables by individual diplomats, and you can't take a pinprick from an individual cable to get a general assessment. The cable to which you're referring is an individual diplomat's view about circumstances in Zimbabwe. Now, Australia has been, as a Commonwealth country, at the forefront in Zimbabwe, but everyone knows that Zimbabwe with President Mugabe is very, very difficult. There's no magic solution there. But when I have my conversations with my counterparts, whether it's Secretary of Defence Gates or whether it's Secretary of State Clinton, Australia is held in very high regard for the role that we play internationally.
Another cable apparently expresses concerns about Australian citizens who've gone missing, have disappeared, and they've ended up on US terrorist watch lists as a result because they've disappeared in the Middle East. Can you confirm this? Do we know about this? Is this a concern for Australia?
Well, firstly, I'm not going to get into a running commentary cable by cable. That's the first point. Secondly, more to the point that I made earlier, it is the potential that very many of these cables go to not just diplomatic reporting, but also to either intelligence matters or to security matters or to operational matters, and that is the very grave risk here. In the two earlier batches of WikiLeaks releases, which dealt with effectively Iraq and Afghanistan, we had to, and in the case of the Afghanistan leaks, are still going through the process, had to go through a painstaking process of ensuring that people weren't placed at risk or that our operations or our national security interests weren't prejudiced. And we need to do the same thing here. Now, it's also the case, because you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of individual cables, that there will be references in those cables which people will regard as either a salacious comment on an individual or voyeuristic, one expression I've heard on the ABC itself this morning. Those comments always need to be kept in perspective, but from our point of view, our starting point here is a very calm, methodical, traversing through the cables as they're released to make sure that neither our national security interests nor Australians' individual welfare is put at risk.
There's been a lot of commentary about how damaging this might be for the US and its allies, but what about putting lives at risk? Could Australian lives be at risk, and do you agree with the White House that these cable leaks could put lives at risk more broadly?
Absolutely. It's the same point that I and my predecessor, Defence Minister Faulkner, made about the earlier releases. But because these ones cover a wider ambit, we have to be very careful to ensure that individual diplomats haven't been put at risk because of comments that they may have made, which might be included in cables, or that people who are citizens of other nations who are working closely with Australia or indeed with the United States, that their interests aren't put at risk because of these unauthorised disclosures. So,
well, the first leaks were back in July. I mean, have you had any intelligence to suggest there have been confirmed deaths linked to these leaks so far?
Well, on the first batch of leaks, the Iraq leaks, I indicated publicly some time ago that we had painstakingly gone through those materials and come to the conclusion that there was no adverse national security or operational or individual risk. We are still going through the Afghanistan leaks to try and satisfy ourselves of that same on that same basis. The preliminary report that I've had is that at this stage we don't believe there's anything which has caused any operational or security risk, but we haven't completed that task, and we will need to do, as we are, exactly the same with this round of leaks. But
Minister, what is that? Can you give us a sense? This committee, are they sitting around a table going through one by one every single one of these 250,000 cables in this latest lot and millions before that?
Well, that is what has occurred in the past and what is in prospect. As I said earlier, because the first two batches were essentially directly in the Defence Task, we established a Defence Task Force. Because these cables cover a much wider ambit, then there has been established a whole-of-government or a cross-government committee on which Defence is represented, but as is the Attorney-General, the Federal Police, the Minister for Foreign Affairs or the Foreign Affairs and Trade Department. So it's a separate task force dealing with these disclosures, but that is the way in which this matter has to be dealt with. Officials need to go painstakingly through each of the cables that are released that might have an impact upon Australia and make a judgment about whether our interests have been adversely impacted and whether there's anything we need to do about it.
We better talk about North Korea now, or tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Sure. Yesterday, the South Korean president warned that his country would strongly retaliate to any further provocation from Pyongyang. Do you think it will come to that? Or has the Communist North stepped back, do you think, or are you concerned?
Well, we're very concerned. Certainly we believe strongly that the Republic of Korea and President Lee have conducted themselves with great restraint in the face of terrible provocation. Not just the recent missile barrage, but the sinking of the Cheonan and North Korea's nuclear program. So we continue to urge restraint, just as we continue to say that we strongly support the Republic of Korea at this very difficult time. Yesterday, for example, we saw the United States and Republic of Korea naval exercise. We had an official on board the USS George Washington as essentially a show of support.
Is that necessary? Do you think that was wise?
Absolutely. We are a member of what is described as the United Nations Command Military Assistance Commission, and that's the United Nations body which has the job of effectively supervising or monitoring the armistice agreement. We're of course not a party to the armistice agreement which ended the Korean War in the 1950s, but we are a party to the United Nations Command Military Assistance Commission. We were one of 3 members of the commission. There are some 16 members who were invited by the US and the Republic of Korea to observe. We observed yesterday with France and UK also represented, and today, the second day of the exercises, there'll be other representatives from the United Nations Command. It is essentially a way of us reflecting that we strongly support the United Nations monitoring of the armistice agreement, but we also strongly support the Republic of Korea at what is a very difficult time, and we continue to indicate to them both publicly and privately that we're very pleased with the restraint they've shown. At the end of last week I spoke to former Defence Minister Kim and made precisely that point.
Stephen Smith, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks very much.
Stephen Smith is, of course, Defence Minister in our Parliament House studio. It's 7 minutes to 8.